Before he became a celebrated character actor in British cinema, Esmond Knight stood on the compass platform of His Majesty's ship Prince of Wales, scanning the grey waters of the Denmark Strait. It was the 24th of May, 1941. Within minutes, a German shell would destroy his world, witness the death of nearly 1,500 men, and plunge him into total darkness. Yet from that catastrophe would emerge one of the most extraordinary stories of courage in British theatrical history. Esmond Pennington Knight was born on the 4th of May, 1906, in East Sheen, Surrey, the youngest of 4 brothers. His father, Francis Knight, managed Knight Brothers, importers of Havana cigars. His mother, Bertha, came from a musical family whose grandmother sang in Queen Victoria's coronation chorus. The Knights were artistic and prosperous. Esmond grew up in a male-dominated household, later admitting he feared his forceful father. When Esmond was 2, the family moved to Putney. Academic success came hard. Esmond suffered severe nerves throughout his schooling and on opening nights. He failed his first Westminster School entrance examination but passed at the second attempt. At Westminster, he excelled as an athlete, competing in the rowing 8 at Henley Regatta, building stamina that would serve his physically demanding stage career. During his first year, he watched a school production of Terence's Phormio performed in Latin. Though unable to understand the words, he was captivated. He left the theatre determined to become an actor. In 1925, aged 19, Knight joined the Old Vic Company. He appeared in a full Shakespeare season in 1926. By 1930, he played Rosencrantz in John Gielgud's legendary Hamlet at the Queen's Theatre, establishing himself as a serious dramatic performer. Film work followed. In 1931, he appeared in Romany Love. For The Private Life of Henry VIII in 1933, Knight and his uncle trained the falcons. In 1934, Alfred Hitchcock cast him as Johann Strauss, the younger in Waltzes from Vienna. By 1939, he was a versatile leading man. Then came war. When Britain entered the Second World War, Knight continued briefly, appearing in Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger's Contraband in 1940. After Dunkirk, he sought a Royal Navy commission but initially failed. He trained local defense volunteers instead. In late 1940, he was finally accepted for naval training. He nearly played the Nazi lead in 49th Parallel, but Eric Portman took the role because Knight was required for military service. He did appear in This England in 1941 before military duties took precedence. Knight trained through the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve. The transition from actor to naval officer was demanding, but he adapted. His athletic background supported him during arduous ascent exercises. By early 1941, he was commissioned as sub-lieutenant and appointed gunnery officer aboard His Majesty's ship Prince of Wales, a King George, the 5th-class battleship built at Camel Laird in Birkenhead. When Knight arrived, welders were completing Job Number X. On the 31st of March, Prince of Wales was declared complete and sailed on shakedown cruises around Scotland. In early May, she moored at Edinburgh within sight of His Majesty's ship Hood, the pride of the British fleet. Despite being officially complete, Prince of Wales had civilian contractors aboard, resolving gun turret problems. These mechanical difficulties would prove tragically significant. On the 22nd of May, 1941, intelligence revealed that German battleship Bismarck and heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen were heading for the Denmark Strait to break into the Atlantic and attack convoys. At midnight, Hood and Prince of Wales received interception orders. For 2 days, they steamed at maximum speed northwesterly. Knight tried to rest, but felt constant tension. Late on the 23rd of May, the crew were told to expect action. At approximately 4 o'clock on the 24th of May, Knight was awakened and ordered to his compass platform station. He grabbed his helmet, lifebelt, binoculars, and telescopes. The compass platform was an unarmored anti-aircraft fire control position above the bridge, protected only by steel helmets. As dawn broke, Knight took position and scanned the horizon. At 5:52, German ships were sighted. Hood opened fire. Prince of Wales followed. At 6 o'clock precisely, Knight witnessed catastrophe. A Bismarck shell struck Hood's ammunition magazines. The explosion was massive. Hood broke apart and sank within seconds. Of 1,418 men, only 3 survived. Knight stood motionless, unable to comprehend the destruction of the ship he had seen beside him weeks earlier. Prince of Wales stood alone against Bismarck and Prince Eugen. Captain John Leach ordered continued firing. Knight remained at his post, calling ranges and bearings. At 6:02, Bismarck fired again. A 15-inch shell screamed toward Prince of Wales. Knight heard a violently onrushing cyclone. Then someone said, "Stretcher here, make way." Knight felt surrounded by casualties. He sensed blood. People asked, "What happened to you?" He looked toward the voices and saw nothing. Absolute darkness. Shrapnel had struck his face with tremendous force. 13 crewmen on the compass platform were killed instantly. Knight survived, but shrapnel destroyed his left eye completely and severely damaged his right. He was blinded. As Knight was carried to the sickbay, battle continued. Prince of Wales fired at Bismarck despite malfunctioning turrets and further hits. Captain Leach maneuvered skillfully, laying smokescreen and withdrawing. Remarkably, Prince of Wales scored 3 hits on Bismarck, causing oil leaks that contributed to the German battleship's destruction 3 days later. Throughout the 24th and 25th of May, Prince of Wales shadowed Bismarck. Knight lay in sickbay, face swathed in bandages, drifting between consciousness. On the 26th, fuel shortage forced Captain Leach toward Iceland to transfer wounded. As they steamed to Reykjavik, Knight heard Bismarck was leaking oil. On the 27th of May, an agitated voice shouted, "Bismarck's been sunk. The ship that blinded him had been destroyed. Nearly 1,500 men died in the battle." The cost of war had never seemed more real. Knight was transferred to Helgafell Army Hospital near Reykjavik. Surgeons assessed his injuries. His left eye was removed. His right eye was saved but deemed useless. Knight was informed he would remain permanently blind. For an actor whose livelihood depended on movement and spatial awareness, this seemed insurmountable. Yet Knight refused defeat. During summer 1941, Knight recuperated in Iceland. He befriended the Prince of Wales navigating officer who had also been on the compass platform. Despite metal embedded in his cheek, this officer had refused to leave his post, steering through the entire battle. He visited Knight, wrote letters, and brought fruit. Knight also bonded with nurse Dorothy Thorday, nicknamed Sister Toby, who became his guide. They walked hospital grounds, countryside, visited Reykjavik, and fished in mountains. Her patience gave Knight confidence to believe his life continued. Knight transferred to England for further treatment. While completely blind, he began his autobiography. Unable to write, he dictated to Secretary Annabella Cloudsley. The book, Seeking the Bubble, was published in 1943. Remarkably, even blind, Knight returned to acting. He performed in radio productions where his distinctive voice enabled him to work without sight. In 1943, Michael Powell offered him a Nazi villain role in The Silver Fleet. Knight performed entirely blind, relying on stage, training, memory, and guidance. It was an extraordinary achievement. Then came the miracle. In 1943, Knight began treatments from Dr. Vincent Nesfield, designed to restore sight to his surviving eye. Gradually, painstakingly, Dr. Nesfield worked to repair catastrophic damage. The process took months. Slowly, Knight perceived light, shapes, movement. Knight regained partial sight in his right eye. His vision was clouded, limited, like looking through fog. But he could see. Partial sight transformed his career. In 1944, he appeared in Powell and Pressburger's A Canterbury Tale, playing the village idiot and Seven Sisters soldier, providing Chaucer's voiceover. Then came his breakthrough. Laurence Olivier cast him as Fluellen, the Welsh officer, in Henry V in 1944. His performance was praised. He proved partial blindness did not prevent powerful performances. Knight worked extensively with Olivier and Powell and Pressburger. He appeared in Olivier's Hamlet in 1948 and Richard III in 1955. For Powell and Pressburger, he appeared in Black Narcissus in 1947 and The Red Shoes in 1948. In Black Narcissus, he played the old general in one of British cinema's most visually striking achievements. The film won the Academy Award for Best Cinematography. Knight develops techniques for memorizing blocking, sensing actor positions, and moving naturally despite limited sight. Fellow performers trusted him completely. He never missed cues. He never appeared uncertain. In 1951, Knight took a leading role in Jean Renoir's The River. Critics and audiences were unaware he was partially blind. On the 18th of February, 1957, Knight became subject of This Is Your Life, presented by Eamon Andrews. Guests included Balliol Holloway from Old Vic days, Nurse Dorothy Thorday from Iceland, Dr. Vincent Nesfield, who restored his sight, and Michael Buxton, a Prince of Wales shipmate. One guest intended was Burkhard, Baron von Mullenheim-Rechberg, Bismarck's third gunnery officer, but illness prevented attendance. 6 months later, they finally met, 16 years after facing each other as enemies. In 1960, Knight experienced a remarkable moment. He was cast as Captain John Leach in Sink the Bismarck. Playing the captain of the ship where he was blinded 19 years earlier, Knight delivered a performance of quiet authority. Throughout the 1960s and the 1970s, Knight worked steadily. In 1960, he played Jack Cade in the BBC's An Age of Kings. From 1961, he starred as Professor Ernest Reinhardt in A for Andromeda. He appeared in Peeping Tom in 1960, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold in 1965, and Anne of the Thousand Days in 1969. In 1976, Richard Lester cast Knight in Robin and Marion, playing a blind old man defying Richard I. Knight removed his glass eye, performing with the empty socket visible. It was a powerful artistic choice. Knight continued acting into his 80s. His final film was Superman IV, The Quest for Peace, in 1987. Knight had amassed 166 stage credits and 160 screen roles over 60 years. On the 23rd of February, 1987, Esmond Knight passed away in London, aged 80, following a heart attack. He was survived by wife Nora Swinburne and daughter Rosalind Knight, both distinguished actresses. Colleagues spoke of his professionalism, kindness, remarkable skill, and refusal to seek sympathy. Knight worked without complaint. Esmond Knight's story remains one of the most remarkable in British theatrical history. Blinded in battle, he refused to accept his career was over. Through determination and skill, he proved disability need not be a barrier to artistic excellence. He demonstrated that blindness did not mean invisibility. For 46 years, he brought courage to every performance. Before he became Cyril Blamire in Last of the Summer Wine, before he portrayed Rangi Ram in It Ain't Half Hot Mum, Michael Bates was Major Bates of the 9th Gurkha Rifles, leading fearless Nepalese soldiers through the steaming jungles of Burma against the Japanese. Born in India, speaking fluent Urdu and Hindi, he would spend 4 years fighting behind enemy lines with the legendary Chindits, earning mentions in dispatches for his courage. This is the story of how colonial India shaped a boy, how war forged a soldier, and how both created one of British television's most memorable character actors. Michael Hammond Bates was born on the 4th of December, 1920, in Jhansi, United Provinces, India. His parents were of Cheshire families. His father, Henry Stuart Harry Bates, was educated at Denstone School and Cambridge University before entering the Indian Civil Service in 1920. He served as Deputy Secretary of the Revenue Department and member of the Board of Revenue for the United Provinces of India until 1947, when he was created Companion of the Order of the Star of India. His mother, Sarah Clark Walker, was daughter of William Hammond Walker, also of Congleton, Cheshire. Young Michael's first languages were Hindi and Urdu. He grew up immersed in Indian culture, surrounded by the sights, sounds, and languages of colonial India. This childhood would profoundly shape his later life, giving him an authenticity and understanding of Indian culture that few British actors possessed. At age 7, following the custom of colonial families, Michael was sent home to England for education. This painful separation from parents and homeland was standard practice, designed to ensure proper British schooling. Bates was educated at Uppingham School, a prestigious public school in Rutland, then followed his father to St. Catherine's College, Cambridge. At Cambridge, he studied during the late 1930s as war clouds gathered over Europe. When Britain declared war on Germany in September 1939, Bates was still completing his education. By March 1942, aged 21, he received his commission in the Indian Army. The Indian Army was distinct from the British Army, composed primarily of Indian soldiers led by British officers. It had fought with distinction in the First World War and would prove itself again in the Second. Bates was assigned to the 3rd Battalion, 9th Gurkha Rifles. The Gurkhas were legendary fighting men from Nepal, renowned for their courage, loyalty, and ferocity in combat. British officers who commanded Gurkha regiments were required to learn their languages and customs. For Bates, with his fluent Urdu and Hindi and deep understanding of South Asian culture, this was natural. The 9th Gurkha Rifles had distinguished itself since its formation in 1817. By 1942, when Bates joined, the regiment was preparing for some of the most brutal fighting of the war, the Burma Campaign. After Japan invaded Burma in January 1942, British and Indian forces were driven out in the longest retreat in British military history, covering 1,000 miles. By mid-1942, the British were planning to retake Burma. Part of this strategy involved long-range penetration units that would operate deep behind Japanese lines. Brigadier Orde Wingate created the Chindits, special operations units named after the Burmese Chinthi, mythical temple guardians. The Chindits would infiltrate Japanese-held territory, disrupt supply lines, destroy communications, and tie down enemy forces. It was extraordinarily dangerous work. The first Chindit expedition, Operation Longcloth, launched in February 1943. 3,000 men entered Burma in multiple columns. They marched over 1,000 miles through dense jungle, endured disease, starvation, and exhaustion. Of the 3,000 who entered, only 2,182 returned. 600 were so ill they could not return to active duty. Bates joined the 3rd Battalion, 9th Gurkha Rifles as they prepared for the second Chindit operation in 1944. This operation, codenamed Thursday, was far larger, over 20,000 British and Commonwealth soldiers. The Chindits would be flown into Burma by glider and transport aircraft, establishing fortified strongholds deep in enemy territory. From these bases, columns would raid Japanese positions, ambush convoys, and gather intelligence. The 4th, 6th, and 9th Gurkha Rifles formed substantial portions of the Chindit force. Bates, now promoted to major, led Gurkha soldiers in conditions almost beyond imagination. The Burmese jungle was a nightmare of dense vegetation, monsoon rains, leeches, mosquitoes, snakes, and tropical diseases. Malaria, dysentery, and typhus were constant threats. The Japanese were tenacious, skilled jungle fighters who showed no mercy to prisoners. The Chindits operated behind Japanese lines for months. They were supplied entirely by airdrops, dependent on wireless communications to call in supplies and air support. Each man carried over 70 pounds of equipment through trackless jungle. They marched for days without rest, slept in monsoon rains, ate meager rations, and fought sudden, vicious engagements with enemy patrols. Bates led his Gurkha soldiers with skill and courage. The relationship between British officers and Gurkha soldiers was unique, built on mutual respect and shared hardship. Gurkha soldiers were extraordinarily brave, attacking fortified positions with their traditional curved kukri knives when ammunition ran low. They followed orders without hesitation, expecting their British officers to lead from the front and share every danger. In 1944, Bates received mention in dispatches for gallantry and distinguished service. This honor recognized officers who displayed courage, leadership, and dedication to duty. The exact circumstances remain unrecorded, but it likely involved leading his men through extremely dangerous operations or displaying exceptional resolve under fire. The second Chindit operation lasted from March to August 1944. The Chindits captured the vital town of Mogayung in June, disrupting Japanese communications and supply lines. However, casualties were severe. The Chindits suffered from combat losses, disease, malnutrition, and exhaustion. Many survivors were physically and psychologically scarred for life. Brigadier Orde Wingate himself was killed in an air crash in March 1944, depriving the force of its visionary leader. Bates endured 4 years of Burma service. He witnessed extreme hardship, soldiers lost in ambushes, men weakened by disease and starvation, the relentless brutality of jungle combat. He observed the extraordinary courage of his Gurkha soldiers and gained lessons about leadership, endurance, and human resilience that would stay with him forever. When the war ended in August 1945, Bates was demobilized and returned to England profoundly changed. Many veterans struggled to readjust to civilian life. Bates faced the same challenge. The discipline, camaraderie, and purpose of military service were replaced by uncertainty. In 1953, Bates joined the Stratford Festival in Stratford, Ontario, Canada, as an ensemble member. He appeared in Richard III and All's Well That Ends Well, where his stage presence and commanding voice attracted attention. In 1956, Bates appeared in Hotel Paradiso, starring Alec Guinness, at the Winter Garden Theatre in London. His career advanced steadily. On radio, he played multiple characters in the BBC's long-running comedy series The Navy Lark, including Abel Seaman Ginger, Lieutenant Bates, Rear Admiral Ironbridge, the Padre, and Captain Ignatius Aloysius Atchison. His versatility and vocal range made him invaluable. Film roles followed. Bates appeared in Bedazzled in 1967, Battle of Britain in 1969 as Warrant Officer Warwick, Oh What a Lovely War in 1969, and Patton in 1970 as Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, to whom he bore a striking resemblance. In 1971, he played Chief Guard Barnes in Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange, delivering a memorable performance. He later appeared in Alfred Hitchcock's Frenzy in 1972. In 1973, Bates was cast as Cyril Blameyer in Last of the Summer Wine, the BBC comedy about three elderly men in Yorkshire. Bates played the pompous, snobbish ex-military Blameyer with precision, bringing military bearing and comic timing to the role. However, Bates clashed with co-star Bill Owen during pre-production over political differences. Peter Sallis later described Bates as slightly to the right of Thatcher. Despite tensions, the cast worked professionally. Bates remained on the series from 1973 to 1975. In 1974, Bates took his most controversial role, Rangi Ram in It Ain't Half Hot Mum, a BBC comedy set in Burma during the Second World War. The series followed a Royal Artillery concert party entertaining troops. Bates played Rangi Ram, the Indian bearer to Battery Sergeant Major Williams. The role required makeup to darken his skin, prompting later debate about the practice. Series co-creator Jimmy Perry defended the casting, noting Bates was born in India and spoke fluent Urdu. Perry insisted the makeup was only a light tan rather than full darkening. Nevertheless, the BBC later declined to repeat the series, citing concerns about the portrayal. In the historical context, Bates brought genuine authenticity to the role. His fluency in Indian languages, understanding of culture from childhood, and sincere affection for the country where he was born gave his performance depth rather than caricature. Bates appeared in It Ain't Half Hot Mum from 1974 to 1977. Rangi Ram became his most beloved character, admired for warmth, wit, and comic rhythm. Behind the scenes, however, Bates was gravely ill. In the mid-1970s, he developed cancer in his leg, reportedly triggered by an injury during a jousting stunt in pantomime. The illness progressed rapidly. Bates left Last of the Summer Wine in 1975 because location filming in the Yorkshire Hills became too demanding physically. Brian Wilde replaced him as the third man in the trio. Nevertheless, Bates continued with It Ain't Half Hot Mum, knowing Rangi Ram remained a favourite with audiences. Despite severe pain, he completed filming of Series 5 in 1977 with exceptional professionalism, earning admiration from cast and crew. On the 11th of January, 1978, Michael Bates passed away at the Royal Marsden Hospital in Chelsea, London, aged 57. He left behind his wife Margaret, whom he married in 1954, and their 3 children, Rupert, Camilla, and Jolyon. His final series of It Ain't Half Hot Mum had only just been broadcast. Viewers learned of his death only after the episodes aired. Tributes described Bates as deeply professional, culturally knowledgeable, and remarkably versatile. Those who had worked with him spoke of a thoughtful, intelligent man whose fluency in multiple languages and genuine understanding of South Asian culture enriched his performances. His years in Burma had given him discipline, endurance, and a clear understanding of sacrifice. Michael Bates's journey from colonial India through the jungles of Burma to British television screens was extraordinary. Born into one world, he fought to preserve it, then returned to a Britain transformed by war. He carried into acting the resilience learned in combat, the understanding gained from childhood in India, and the quiet discipline of a soldier who had endured the harshest conditions. He never forgot his Gurkha soldiers or the lessons learned in Burma. Those experiences lived in his work, shaping every role and every performance. Michael Bates, the major who became a comic actor, demonstrating that courage takes many forms. Before they created some of British cinema's finest satirical comedies, before Private's Progress and I'm All Right Jack, John and Roy Boulting were at war. John flew with the Royal Air Force Film Unit, documenting bomber crews over Europe. Roy commanded Army Film Unit operations in North Africa, creating Desert Victory, a documentary that won the Academy Award and changed how America viewed the war. These identical twin brothers, born 30 minutes apart, spent the Second World War capturing on film the courage, sacrifice, and grim reality of combat. This is the story of how war transformed two young filmmakers into Britain's most important documentary makers and, eventually, masters of social satire. John Edward Boulting and Roy Alfred Clarence Boulting were born on the 21st of December, 1913, in Bray, Berkshire, England. John was elder by 30 minutes. Their father, Arthur Boulting, and mother, Rosetta Ney Bennett, raised 4 sons. Their elder brother, Sidney Boulting, became an actor and stage producer known as Peter Coates, directing the original production of The Mousetrap. A younger brother, Guy, died aged 8. The twins attended Reading School, where they started a film club, demonstrating early passion for cinema. While still at school, they appeared as extras in the 1931 film Tell England. Their fascination with filmmaking intensified. By 1937, aged 23, John and Roy founded Charter Film Productions, their own production company. They began making short films, including The Landlady in 1937 and Consider Your Verdict in 1938. These films caught attention of critics and audiences, establishing the brothers as promising young filmmakers. In January to November 1937, before Charter Films was founded, John demonstrated his political convictions by serving on the Republican side in the Spanish Civil War as an ambulance driver with the Spanish Medical Aid Committee. According to Richard Attenborough, John was nearly captured. This experience confirmed John's socialist beliefs and commitment to fighting fascism. When he returned to England, he and Roy threw themselves into filmmaking with renewed urgency. In 1939, the twins made Pastor Hall, an anti-Nazi film about German pastor Martin Niemöller who opposed Hitler. The film encountered censorship problems before war was declared, as Britain sought to avoid antagonizing Germany. However, once war began in September 1939, Pastor Hall became timely and powerful. It demonstrated the Boultings' willingness to tackle serious political subjects and make films with social conscience. When Britain entered the Second World War, the Boulting brothers faced the same choice as all young men: how to serve. Both volunteered for military service, but their filmmaking skills made them valuable for propaganda and documentary work. In 1941, Roy joined the Army Film Unit. John joined the Royal Air Force Film Unit. The brothers would spend the war separately, each making vital contributions to the British war effort through cinema. Roy Boulting was commissioned as a captain in the British Army. He initially served with a tank regiment for over a year, experiencing military life firsthand. This experience gave him understanding of soldiers' lives, their fears, humor, and camaraderie. Then he transferred to the Army Film Unit, where his filmmaking skills could be properly utilized. The Army Film and Photographic Unit was formed on the 24th of October, 1941, to record military events involving British and Commonwealth armies. Professional cameramen and photographers were recruited, trained as soldiers, and sent to combat zones. The work was extraordinarily dangerous. Almost 23% of Army Film and Photographic Unit soldiers were killed in action. a casualty rate higher than most infantry units. In early 1942, Roy was sent to Cairo, Egypt, as part of No. 1 Unit. He arrived during Britain's darkest hour in North Africa. General Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps had driven British forces back across Libya. Cairo itself seemed threatened. Then came the First Battle of El Alamein in July 1942, which stopped Rommel's advance. The Second Battle of El Alamein in October and November 1942 became the turning point. Roy Boulting was responsible for creating Desert Victory, a documentary about the North Africa campaign. Working with footage shot by Army Film Unit cameramen, including Sergeant Billy Jordan, who skillfully filmed the opening artillery barrage at El Alamein, Roy assembled a masterpiece of documentary filmmaking. Desert Victory combined newsreel footage, scenes shot during actual combat, and carefully structured narrative to tell the story of Montgomery's victory over Rommel. The film opened with scenes of defeat and retreat, then showed the build-up to El Alamein, the massive artillery barrage, the infantry attack, the tank battles, and finally the pursuit of German forces across North Africa. The famous gunflash montage, showing British artillery bombarding by night, became one of the most memorable sequences in war documentary history. Desert Victory was not propaganda in the crude sense. It showed real soldiers, real fear, real courage, and real cost of victory. Desert Victory was released in 1943 and became a sensation. It won 10,000 bookings in United States theaters, unprecedented for a British documentary. American audiences, previously skeptical of British military capability after defeats in France, Norway, and early North Africa, saw proof that British forces could fight and win. The film's realism redirected United States propaganda strategies, proving that audiences responded to authentic documentation rather than staged heroics. In March 1944, Desert Victory won the Academy Award for Best Documentary. It was extraordinary recognition for a British Army propaganda film. Roy Boulting's skill in assembling footage, creating narrative structure, and maintaining emotional impact had created something that transcended propaganda and became genuine cinema. Roy followed Desert Victory with Tunisian Victory in 1944, documenting the final North Africa campaign. This film was more complicated, as United States forces were heavily involved and American authorities wanted appropriate representation. Frank Capra, the Hollywood director working for United States forces, became involved. Winston Churchill himself sat beside the editing equipment deciding exact re-editing of final shots. The film became a joint British and American production, symbolizing Allied cooperation but losing some of the unity of vision that made Desert Victory so powerful. Roy also worked on Burma Victory in 1945, documenting the brutal campaign to recapture Burma from Japanese forces. The Burma campaign was less well known than European and North African theaters, but involved some of the war's hardest fighting in appalling conditions. Burma Victory brought attention to the forgotten 14th Army and their extraordinary achievements. Meanwhile, John Boulting served as an officer in the Royal Air Force Film Unit. He was given the task of making Journey Together in 1945, a dramatized documentary about training and combat experience of a bomber crew. This was different from Roy's work. Rather than assembling combat footage into documentary, John created a scripted drama using real Royal Air Force personnel and authentic locations. Journey Together starred Richard Attenborough in the lead role, with Terence Rattigan working on the script. The film followed bomber crew members through training in Britain and North America, then operational missions over Europe. It showed not just the glamour of flying, but the fear, exhaustion, and losses. John brought to the film his understanding of Royal Air Force culture, the dark humor of men facing death, and the bonds formed between crew members. Journey Together was praised for its authenticity. Unlike Hollywood films that glamorized air combat, John's film showed the mundane reality: long hours of training, technical difficulties, navigation problems, and sudden death. It honored Royal Air Force crews without sentimentality, presenting them as ordinary men doing extraordinary things. When war ended in 1945, the Boulting Brothers had established themselves as Britain's premier documentary filmmakers. Roy had won an Academy Award. John had created a definitive Royal Air Force drama. Both had served with distinction, using cinema to support the war effort and preserve record of British military achievement. The war had taught them discipline, shown them human courage and weakness, and given them material that would influence their post-war work. After the war, the Boultings reunited to make drama films. Fame is the Spur in 1947 explored political betrayal. Brighton Rock in 1947, starring Richard Attenborough, became a classic British gangster film. The Guinea Pig in 1948 addressed class divisions. 7 Days to Noon in 1950, which they co-directed, won an Oscar for Best Story. The film's nuclear anxiety reflected post-war fears. In the mid-1950s, the Boultings became known for affectionate satires on British institutions. Private's Progress in 1956 satirized army life, becoming the second most commercially successful British film of 1956. Lucky Jim in 1957 attacked academic pomposity. Brothers-in-Law in 1957 mocked the legal profession. Carlton Brown of the Foreign Office in 1959 satirized diplomacy. Their biggest hit was I'm All Right Jack in 1959, starring Peter Sellers as a bloody-minded shop steward. The film satirized industrial relations, union intransigence, and management incompetence with equal ferocity. It was arguably the crucial film about post-war Britain, capturing the country's industrial decline, class conflicts, and failure to adapt to changing times. I'm All Right Jack showed how war experience informed the Boultings' work. The discipline, efficiency, and national unity of wartime contrasted sharply with peacetime chaos, selfishness, and institutional decay they satirized. Throughout their careers, the Boulting brothers typically worked as a team. One produced while the other directed, but the product remained essentially a Boulting brothers film. They were socialists who wanted cinema to reflect real world rather than escapist fantasy. Their wartime documentaries had shown reality unvarnished. Their post-war satires continued that tradition, using comedy to expose uncomfortable truths about British society. John Boulting passed away on the 17th of June, 1985, aged 71. Roy Boulting passed away on the 5th of November, 2001, aged 87. The brothers had devoted their lives to cinema, creating films that entertained, challenged, and reflected Britain back to itself. The Boulting brothers' wartime service was not traditional combat, but their contribution was immense. Roy's Desert Victory changed American perceptions of British military capability at a crucial moment. John's Journey Together honored Royal Air Force crews with authenticity they deserved. Both brothers used cinema to support the war effort, preserve historical record, and demonstrate that filmmaking could be form of service. After war, they brought lessons learned to their satirical comedies. They understood institutions from inside, having served in military ones. They understood how systems could be inefficient, how authority could be absurd, how ordinary people navigated bureaucracy with humor and cunning. Their satires were affectionate because they came from men who had served, understood duty, but also recognized human folly. The Boulting brothers, the filmmaking twins who documented war and satirized peace, reminding Britain to laugh at itself while never forgetting the cost of freedom. Before he became famous for being someone else, before I Was Monty's double made him briefly celebrated, Myrick Edward Clifton James was a struggling actor who had fought at the Somme, lost a finger to German shrapnel, and spent 25 years playing minor roles in forgotten productions. Then, in 1944, British intelligence noticed he looked uncannily like Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery. For a few extraordinary days in May 1944, this obscure lieutenant in the Royal Army Pay Corps became one of the most important men in the Allied deception campaign, impersonating Britain's most famous general to fool Hitler. This is the story of Operation Copperhead, the actor who became a general, and the price of brief fame. Myrick Edward Clifton James was born in April 1898 in Perth, Western Australia. His father, John Charles Horsey James, was Western Australia's first Commissioner of Titles, a nominated member of the Western Australian Legislative Council from 1887 to 1888, Judge of the Supreme Court, and President of the Western Australian Cricket Association from 1884 to 1899. His mother was Rebecca Catherine Clifton. The James family was prominent in Western Australian colonial society, descended from early settlers of historical significance. When Clifton James was 2 years old, his family left Australia for England. He grew up in England, far from his birthplace, but always identified as Australian. He became fascinated by theatre, drawn to performing despite his respectable family background. Acting was not considered a suitable profession for someone of his class, but Clifton James was determined. When the First World War broke out in August 1914, Clifton James was 16. By the time he was old enough to enlist, the war was grinding towards its bloodiest phases. He joined the Royal Fusiliers, a distinguished infantry regiment. In 1916, he saw action at the Battle of the Somme, one of the war's most catastrophic engagements. The Somme offensive lasted from July to November 1916, costing over 1 million casualties on all sides. During the fighting, Clifton James was wounded by German shrapnel. He lost his right-hand middle finger. The injury was not life-threatening, but it was permanent and visible. For the rest of his life, Clifton James would be missing that finger, a constant reminder of the Somme. After recovering, he was demobilized when the war ended in November 1918. Clifton James returned to civilian life determined to become an actor. He later said he started at 15 shillings weekly with Fred Carno, the impresario who put Charlie Chaplin on the road to fame. Carno's companies toured Britain performing music hall, comedy, and variety acts. It was hard, unglamorous work, but it taught Clifton James his craft, timing, physical comedy, audience interaction, and the discipline of live performance. Throughout the 1920s and 30s, Clifton James struggled to establish himself. He played minor roles in lesser-known productions, never achieving breakthrough into major West End theatres or films. He was competent, reliable, but unremarkable. Apart from his physical resemblance to certain public figures, nothing distinguished him from hundreds of other jobbing actors. He married, had 2 children, and tried to make ends meet through irregular theatre work. When the Second World War broke out in September 1939, Clifton James, now aged 41, volunteered to serve again. Having fought in the First World War, he hoped to be assigned to Entertainment's National Service Association to entertain troops. Instead, he was commissioned as second lieutenant in the Royal Army Pay Corps on the 11th of July, 1940, and posted to Leicester. The Royal Army Pay Corps was an administrative branch responsible for soldiers' wages and financial records. It was essential work, but utterly unglamorous. Clifton James, who had hoped to use his acting skills entertaining soldiers, found himself processing paperwork. However, he continued performing in amateur shows to boost troop morale. In one such show in Leicester, Clifton James appeared briefly dressed as Field Marshal Montgomery, Britain's most famous general. Montgomery commanded the 8th Army in North Africa, defeating Rommel at El Alamein. He would command British land forces during the invasion of Normandy. Montgomery was instantly recognizable: the beret, the intense gaze, the clipped speech. Clifton James's impression was uncannily accurate. A photograph of Clifton James as Montgomery appeared in the News Chronicle newspaper in April 1944. Lieutenant Colonel John Jervis Reed, head of Operations Branch of British Intelligence, saw the photograph and was stunned by the resemblance. He immediately recognized its potential for deception. German intelligence knew Montgomery would command British forces during the invasion of France. If Montgomery could be seen elsewhere shortly before the invasion, German commanders might conclude the invasion was not imminent or would occur at a different location. Brigadier Dudley Clark, the brilliant deception planner who had pioneered strategic deception in North Africa, had been thinking about using a Montgomery double after watching the film 5 Graves to Cairo, which featured impersonation as a plot element. Clark initially considered actor Miles Mander, who appeared in 5 Graves to Cairo, but Mander was too tall. Another lookalike candidate broke his leg in a motorcycle accident. When Jervis Reed spotted Clifton James's photograph, the problem was solved. Clifton James was contacted by Lieutenant Colonel David Niven, the Hollywood actor serving with the Army's film unit. Niven invited Clifton James to London on the pretext of making a film. When Clifton James arrived and learned the true purpose, he supposedly burst into tears because he thought he had been exposed as a bigamist, receiving double marriage allowance. Like many of Niven's anecdotes, this story is viewed with skepticism. What is certain is that Clifton James agreed to participate in Operation Copperhead, the plan to impersonate Montgomery. The operation was part of Operation Bodyguard, the massive Allied deception campaign to mislead German intelligence about the Normandy invasion. Operation Copperhead aimed to suggest Montgomery was focused on Mediterranean theatre rather than preparing for northern France invasion, implying invasion was not imminent or would occur in southern France first. Clifton James was assigned to Montgomery's headquarters to study the general's mannerisms. Montgomery was a teetotaler and non-smoker with precise habits and distinctive speech patterns. Clifton James was a notorious heavy drinker and smoker, quite unlike Montgomery in personality. He had to give up alcohol and tobacco. His missing finger was fitted with a prosthetic. He studied Montgomery's walk, his habit of sitting in the left rear seat of vehicles, his probing, questioning style, his preference for certain phrases. Captain Stephen Watts, Lieutenant Jack Hervey, and others worked with Clifton James, coaching him in Montgomery's mannerisms. Montgomery himself spent time with Clifton James, allowing him to observe closely. The general was reportedly amused by his double, but understood the operation's importance. On the 26th of May, 1944, less than 2 weeks before D-Day, Operation Copperhead began. Clifton James, dressed in Montgomery's uniform wearing the famous beret, was flown to Gibraltar. German intelligence maintained extensive spy networks in Gibraltar, which was a hotbed of espionage. Clifton James was paraded publicly, meeting the Governor-General at breakfast, talking loudly about fictitious Plan 303. Reportedly, Clifton James drank a bottle of smuggled gin on the flight to Gibraltar, nearly compromising the operation. However, he sobered up and performed his role convincingly. German agents duly observed Montgomery in Gibraltar and reported it to Berlin via Madrid. From Gibraltar, Clifton James flew to Algiers, where he was paraded through the airport and driven to meet General Maitland Wilson, ostensibly to discuss operations against southern France. However, Clifton James was soon moved to a remote villa. Accounts suggest he was spotted smoking and staggering around Algiers, behavior utterly unlike Montgomery. Alternatively, the operation may have simply achieved its purpose quickly. Whatever the reason, Clifton James was flown secretly to Cairo the next day, where he remained hidden until Montgomery's public appearance in Normandy following D-Day. The effectiveness of Operation Copperhead is debated. German intelligence reported Montgomery's presence in Gibraltar and Algiers. Some German officers requested information about his movements. However, higher-level German analysts dismissed reports as probable disinformation. German intelligence was sophisticated enough to recognize possible deception. They noted discrepancies and lack of supporting evidence. Nevertheless, German intelligence did divert some attention to southern France. Germany sent armored divisions south in the lead-up to D-Day. Whether this was due to Operation Copperhead or other deception efforts is unclear. What is certain is that Operation Copperhead was part of the larger bodyguard deception, which successfully convinced Germany that the main invasion would occur at Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy. After D-Day on the 6th of June, 1944, when Montgomery's presence in Normandy became public, Clifton James was released from hiding in Cairo. He returned to Britain and resumed his position with the Royal Army Pay Corps. He had been absent for mysterious weeks, unable to explain where he had been. According to Dennis Wheatley, who was part of British deception efforts, Clifton James was treated shabbily, receiving no official recognition for his services. When Clifton James was demobilized in June 1946, he struggled to find theatrical employment. He applied for unemployment benefits to support his wife and 2 children in London. The man who had impersonated Britain's most famous general could not find work. In 1947, he made a brief non-speaking appearance as an extra in the film Holiday Camp. In 1954, nearly 10 years after Operation Copperhead, Clifton James published a book about his exploits entitled I Was Monty's Double, released in the United States as The Counterfeit General Montgomery. The book told the story of his brief moment as Montgomery's impersonator. It became popular, catching attention of filmmakers. In 1958, the book was adapted into a film directed by John Guillermin, from a screenplay by Brian Forbes. The film starred John Mills and Cecil Parker, but the real star was Clifton James himself, playing both himself and Montgomery. It was the only major role Clifton James ever played. After decades of struggling in minor parts, he finally achieved screen immortality, portraying himself and the general he had impersonated. The film took creative liberties. Operation Copperhead became Operation Hambone. Additional elements of comedy, danger, and intrigue were added, including a fictional kidnapping attempt. However, it largely followed Clifton James's account and gave him deserved recognition. He wore Montgomery's actual uniform, replicated his mannerisms, and brought authenticity no other actor could provide. Critics praised the film. Audiences loved seeing the real Clifton James portray his extraordinary experience. When Montgomery viewed the film at a London cinema, audiences outside reportedly assumed he was Clifton James, so perfect was the resemblance. The film inspired a Goon Show episode entitled "I Was Monty's Treble," referring to multiple doppelgangers. In 1957, Clifton James appeared in a short cameo role as Field Marshal Montgomery in the film High Flight, again non-speaking and uncredited. He also appeared on American television show To Tell the Truth in 1959, where a panel of celebrities had to guess which of three people claiming to be Monty's double was telling the truth. On the 5th of May, 1963, Myrick Edward Clifton James passed away at his home in Worthing, Sussex, England, aged 65. He had finally achieved recognition through I Was Monty's Double, but the fame was brief. He remained a footnote in history, the actor who briefly became a general, the man whose resemblance to Montgomery was exploited for a few days, in May 1944. Clifton James's story is extraordinary precisely because he was ordinary. He was not a trained spy or professional impersonator. He was a struggling actor who happened to look like Montgomery, who had served in the First World War, and who was willing to serve again in the Second World War in whatever capacity required. His role in Operation Copperhead was a small part of a vast deception campaign, but he played it with courage and commitment. The greatest tragedy of Clifton James's life is that he received so little recognition during the war and struggled so hard afterwards. The army used him, then discarded him. He returned to the Royal Army Pay Corps, unable to discuss his extraordinary adventure, and was demobilized to unemployment. Only through writing his book and making the film did he receive acknowledgement. Myrick Edward Clifton James, the actor who briefly wore a general's uniform and fooled an empire, proving that even small deceptions can change history. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to Cinema Peak for more true stories from the wars that shaped our world.